I'm an 18-year-old female, and this happened back in 2009 when I was a freshman in college. I lived in a small city in the US, which was an overall safe area in my state. I even told my friends that even some of the criminals in my city were polite. Long story short, it was a neat little city that really deserved more attention. The people were nice, and sirens would almost never be heard. One night, a few of my college friends and I had just finished a concert from our school performed by a local band. They never made it big, but they were still well known around the area, especially if you were into music. Anyway, we leave the school trying to find somewhere to eat as we were practically starving. It was around 11 at night, meaning most places were closed, making it harder for us to find food. Eventually, we decided to go by a nearby McDonald's as we were dirt poor college students with little to no money. We enter the McDonald's and order our food and find a nearby table to eat at. For some context, there were 4 people. Me, my friend Emily, my friend James, and his girlfriend Samantha. As we're eating a total of 40 plus McNuggets, I notice a man walk in hyperventilating as if he had just ran a marathon. He wore black sweatpants, a white shirt, and had on a backpack. Not that there was anything wrong with him, but something about him just made me feel uneasy. On top of that, he seemed disheveled with long messy hair and looked as if he hadn't been to the gym in years. Now, I'm not one to judge people, but there was something about this man that was just off. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, I think nothing of it and just continued eating while talking to my friends. I nudge Emily and whisper in her ear if she thinks that man seemed off. She just so happens to agree with me and tells me that we should just not pay attention to him. We focus on eating our food while chatting with our friends when James turns around and made eye contact with the man. However, not even a minute after, he walks up to our table with a flashlight, smiling his smile. Hey there, weird favor. The toilet in the bathroom is overflowing. Can one of you help me with it? We all just kind of look at each other confused and say that we were eating and to ask an employee. He disregards our suggestion and insists we help him out. We politely decline and tell him no, to which he then asks once again. But before I was about to say something, James says in an annoyed tone to leave us the hell alone and to go away. His face went pale and he grabs a drink before leaving the restaurant. Samantha kept telling us as to how uncomfortable the man made her feel and that she's sworn she's seen him before. We begin to ask her if she was sure, and if she did, where she saw him. She said that she couldn't remember but thought it was sometime last week. We eat for another 20 minutes before leaving to go back home when Emily says something I didn't realize. You know, he never went into the restroom in the first place. How would he know the toilet was overflowing? I look at her with this unsettling face, and that's when I immediately thought of the backpack. Upon realizing this, several questions came up in my mind about why he had a backpack. What were the contents of it? What were his intentions? And what would he have done had one of us gone in there? These questions bothered me for a good week when James saw a chilling news report. Apparently, the same tactic had happened at another restaurant, only this time it actually worked. The same man had tried the approach and managed to lure a woman standing by the men's restroom. He was able to pull her in and do things I won't mention until a few people helped break up the situation. The news showing the man's face on TV made James almost spit out his water as he saw this. James ends up calling the police to put in our tip and what had happened. Police in my city don't mess around, so whenever something bad happened, they were ready to stop it. Eventually, Samantha had remembered seeing the man at a pub she was at. He didn't do anything, but described him as being drunk and annoyed at the bartender. Needless to say, this news went around like wildfire around my city and even my school. What had once been this nice area with barely any crime, only to have something disturbing happen. For those of you wondering, yes, he was thrown in prison. I ended up staying away from that McDonald's for a good while until the paranoia faded. It wasn't until a year later where I learned a truth I didn't know. James and Samantha had moved away, and it was actually Emily who had told me this. During dinner one night with her, I had asked her if she had remembered about the man from McDonald's many years ago. Her eyes went wide, and she said she was going to tell me something she never told me. Turns out, the man had ended his life in prison not too long ago. He couldn't live with the pain anymore and just decided to end it. I was shocked when I learned this and really couldn't believe it. However, it was nice to know that he couldn't hurt any more people while knowing our city was much safer. Anyway, that's my story, and I hope you can all learn from this and help prevent it. If you see or feel something is off, you need to tell someone. There are truly some messed up people in this world.
The night was still young as I cruised the outskirts of Golden Gate Park. I waited patiently for a ping from the Uber app. I needed the extra cash as I was in danger of being short on my rent. The phone chimed, and as I looked to see someone in the outer sunset needing a ride. The picture was a blonde woman with a big smile, and I accepted. It said she had 2 passengers, and the pay was decent. I found a spot to make a U-turn and made my way to a small parking lot. I thought nothing of it at first. It seemed like a young couple who were about to have a night in the bay. It was curious, though. I could see the woman dragging a man with black hair towards the car. She dragged him by a thick leather leash attached to an even thicker collar. I had witnessed lots of things in this city, but even this was new to me. The car door opened and I asked, "Lisa?" "Yeah, that is me," she replied, as she sat in the back seat. I looked at the man who stood outside. He looked hesitant to get in the car. She tugged on the leash with impatience. "Get in here, Henry." "Is he okay?" "He's fine. My husband just seems a little out of it tonight," she replied. The man sat in the car slowly and seemed to just be staring into space. I know that it can be wise to wear layers when in the city, but the man was wearing a rather large hoodie that was much too thick for an August night, even for here. "So, we're going to the Tenderloin, right?" "Yes. If we could get there as quickly as possible, that would be great. I was having trouble with my car, and we can't be late." "Alright, well, let's get moving," I said, while I looked in the rearview mirror to make sure the two were buckled in. I noticed the man's collar was very tight around his neck. I could see the red marks on his skin. The dark brown leather was strange, as it had its own symbols embossed on it. I had never seen anything like it before. I didn't think much of it, though. I was more concerned by how tight it was, and how it looked like there may have been a struggle to put him in. The woman noticed that I was looking at it too. She frowned and asked, "So, are you gonna drive or not?" We hit the road and headed towards the destination. We drove in silence as I tried my best not to look back at the two. I did notice that the man called Henry started to look puzzled as he stared out the window. "Is everything okay back there?" I inquired. "Everything's fine," Lisa remarked. "Where are you taking me?" Henry asked with a strange tone in his voice. It was monotone and sounded like he was half asleep. The woman scowled at him and tapped at his chest, signaling for him to be quiet. It was clear who was the dominant personality in the relationship, but I still found it quite odd. "You know where we're going, Henry. I told you several times." "You told me you were taking me to the temple." "No, I told you we were going to a party, Henry," Lisa replied as she looked frustrated. I looked back in the mirror to see the man had a look of worry in his eyes. I felt that something wasn't right with this woman. It seemed like the man was out of it. I started to think that he was on drugs. "What kind of party?" I asked, as I looked at the woman who frowned. She didn't like me asking any questions, and I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to think of what to say. Like, is it a costume party? Does it matter? I'm just trying to make conversation, sorry. I want to know what kind of party it is. Henry mumbled as he looked at me. The woman grabbed his leash and then tugged on it hard. I could hear as he struggled for air and coughed. It was aggressive and showed a flash of anger. The sight of it made me uncomfortable. "It's a party," she answered, while she loosened her grip on the leash. Henry coughed, then smiled a little bit. I curled my eyebrow as I looked at the two in the back. That's why he's wearing a collar, because he likes it. Whatever floats your boat, I'm not one to judge. An awkward silence fell in the car. I continued to drive to the location as Henry continued to keep his eyes locked on me in the mirror. He tugged on his collar and said, "She's lying to you because she is planning on killing me." Lisa tugged on the leash and growled, "Shut up, Henry. Stop joking around. It isn't funny, and you're going to freak the poor man out." "Are you in danger, dude?" "I am, because this woman is not my wife." "Don't listen to him. He likes to make people uncomfortable for his entertainment," Lisa said. "Then why don't you show him what's in your pocket?" "Listen, I don't want any trouble. I don't want to see what she has." "She has a weapon in her pocket," Henry said, as he lifted his hooded shirt to show a cut across his stomach that had already recently been stitched and burned shut. It explained why he was so out of it. The man had to be miserable with pain. "She used it on me earlier and put this collar on me." "Shut up!" Lisa yelled. "Oh Christ, dude. Do you need to go to the ER? "I just want you to get me away from this woman and take this collar off," Henry pleaded. I started to hit the brakes, but then I felt something cold along my neck. I looked down to see the blade against my throat. "Keep driving, or I will have to kill you," Lisa growled, as I could feel it pressing against my skin. I lifted my foot off the brake and began to accelerate again. I could feel my hands tremble on the wheel. All right, just don't hurt me." "Then just keep driving, and you might live to see another day." "I have a thought," Henry grumbled. "Shut the hell up," Lisa yelled back. "Yeah, let's just do what she says." "How about you hit your brakes hard?" Henry replied as he looked out the window. "I don't see much traffic, so just trust me." "Don't listen to him." "If you want to live, I would do it now," Henry responded. I watched as he lunged at the woman and startled me enough that I slammed on the brakes. The knife fell into my lap, and I caught a glimpse of the weird, jagged blade. It had the same symbols as the collar. The car screeched to a halt, and I heard Henry shout, "Take the collar off, now!" "I'm begging you, don't listen to him," Lisa pleaded. As I turned awkwardly to see he had her pinned down, I reached in the back and realized it was my chance. I took the collar off from Henry and heard a growl that sounded like a wild animal. He smiled as he plunged his hands inside our captor's chest. The blood sprayed, hitting the interior and the windows. "That's much better," Henry remarked. I sat back in my seat, taking a glance at the mirror. Henry smiled back at me and exited the car. He walked around the window, tapping it lightly. I rolled it down in shock. "Thank you." I thought for a moment I was nearly done. "Henry, do you need me to call the police?" I asked nervously. "I don't go by that name anymore. You can call me the Legion." Okay," I responded. As I watched him reach into his pocket, I started to become nervous again. I thought I would die that night. He could see the fear in my face, to which he smiled back at me. "Are you going to kill me?" "No. I owe you. You saved my life," Henry answered. As he grabbed my hand and placed cash in it, I looked to see a few $100s. "That should pay for the cleanup and a little more." "What the hell are you?" "I'm a demon that will end this world. But don't look so scared. At least I tipped."
My name is Sophie, and this happened several years ago when I was in college. I went to a very large university in the United States. The college had quite a bit of students, and most places you would go throughout campus, you would see many different people. Throughout my first couple of years at the college, I made quite a few friends and would hang out with them all the time. However, most of my college friends were not in the same major as me and were not in my classes. My classes were also very large, and there would be over 100 people in them. During the beginning of my junior year, I was sitting next to a girl named Jordan in one of my classes. She introduced herself to me the first day after I sat down. We were both sitting in the back because we only arrived a few moments before class started, and most of the seats were already taken. The next day, we both sat in the same places again. Over time, we spoke more and more and soon became good friends. We both had the same major, and Jordan told me that she had transferred from another university. As the semester went on, we started studying for our classes together in the library occasionally. Eventually, we hung out at each other's places sometimes. I lived in a house with 2 roommates, and Jordan had her own 1-bedroom apartment just off campus. One day, Jordan texted me after class and asked if I wanted to study later that night. I said yes because we did have a big test coming up. Jordan had told me that she had an off-campus job at a shoe store and asked if I could pick her up. She said her car was having problems and she had to walk to work that day. It wasn't a problem for me, and she gave me the address, which was roughly 5 minutes away from my house. Jordan said that she got off at 9 p.m., so I drove there and waited. I parked on the side of the street across from the store. It was a quieter side of town and an old shoe store that seemed like nobody went to. I had wondered why and how Jordan had gotten a job there. It was next door to a couple of other businesses, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but they weren't very popular. Across the street from them was like a wildlife park. I couldn't park directly across the street and had to parallel park a little ways down. I texted her that I was there and waited for a response. It was only 8:55, so I wasn't surprised when she didn't respond for the first couple of minutes. Then, 9 o'clock came and went, and there was still no response from Jordan. As I was sitting there waiting, suddenly I saw a man in front of my car. He must have walked out from the woods area that was next to the street. That was pretty creepy in itself. The man walked right up to my window and signaled for me to roll it down. I did roll it down, and the man leaned in. He asked if he could have a ride. This guy was already giving me the creeps. He had seemingly just emerged from the woods, and I had no clue who he was. He was wearing just a sweatshirt, jeans, and a beanie. Then he said to me he was going to need to get inside my car, or something like that. Then he started to reach inside. I followed my instincts, and I whipped the car into drive and sped out of there. The guy yelled a few things as I left, but I have no clue what they were. I drove to the next street, and my heart was racing. It wasn't until my phone started ringing that I remembered about Jordan. I hadn't even picked her up. I answered my phone, and it was Jordan. She asked me where I had gone and said that she was outside looking for me. I told her about what had happened and said that I was on my way back. I was now worried about Jordan. If there was some guy that wanted to get into my car, I feared Jordan might be in danger. I drove back around the block to the street where the shoe store was. When I got there, the street was very quiet and seemingly empty, other than a few cars parked on the side of the road. I didn't see the man, so that was good. I parked where I had been before, but was very nervous. As soon as I parked, I called Jordan to tell her that I was there. She answered and told me that she was crossing the street, and I saw her up a ways. I was really glad to see her. She walked to my car and then opened the passenger's door. She got like halfway inside and then said that she had forgotten something and quickly left the car and started going to the rear of my vehicle. She left the door wide open, and I leaned over to ask her what she was doing. But just then, the man appeared again. He came from the back side of my car and entered through the wide open door. I tried to put my car into drive again, but he grabbed my wrist. With my other hand, I opened my driver's door. We struggled for a few seconds with the man trying to grab me. I was able to make it just outside of my door, and when I did, I ran across the street. The man followed after me. All of the businesses and stores on that side of the street were now closed, and I had to run all the way down the sidewalk. I got around to the corner and could hear the man was still behind me. When I made it around the corner, I ran behind one of the buildings into an alleyway and hid there. I don't think he knew where I went, and he seemed to walk around the area for a bit and then turn back. I stayed there, hiding behind a dumpster, and I called the police, and then I called Jordan. She didn't answer, and I was really worried about her. I left my hiding spot to go back to the street. When I did, I saw that my car was now gone. I had left the keys in the ignition after all, so I wasn't too surprised. I called out for Jordan, but she wasn't answering me. I called her over and over on her phone as well, but she didn't pick up. Soon, the police arrived at the scene. I told them everything and about Jordan, who I couldn't locate. I answered a bunch of questions over the next hour or so, and then got a ride home. The next day, I was told that Jordan and the man had both been located. What surprised me was that they had been working together. It all made sense after I thought about it. I was really shocked, though. I had considered her to be my best friend.
This is a story that happened to me when I was around 24 years old. I recently moved to Boston for an internship to help prepare for my field of study since I had just graduated from school. However, it wasn't a paid internship, and the money I did make was from my disability insurance. This meant that I had to find a job in order to make income. After days of searching for jobs, I finally found one as a part-time babysitter. I was good with children and figured babysitting wouldn't be bad for a first job. However, little did I know that those expectations were far from true. Ever since I had moved, I had babysat for a while now and have dealt with many different kids, but this kid takes the prize. I won't disclose personal information about her, but we'll call her Rachel. Rachel was around 9 and was the small blonde girl who was obsessed with dolls. She basically liked any type of dolls. Antique dolls, rag dolls, Barbie dolls, you name it. One time, I had babysat for her for 2 days as her parents would be out of town. She was nice, but wasn't very talkative and just mainly played with her dolls and tended to them. I would be staying in the guest bedroom, and, of course, there were dolls. I remember this one porcelain doll sitting on a chair beside the bed I'd be sleeping in. It was a very unnerving doll, the type where it felt like you were being watched by it whenever you moved. I thought nothing of it and just got ready for bed and made sure Rachel was asleep. It was around 11 p.m. and I had got ready for bed and went to sleep with ease. I'd say I slept for a good hour or so before waking up to the sound of something in the room. I wake up and take a look at the clock and saw that it was 1 a.m. The second I turned on the light, I take a look around the room and see that the doll's head had been rotated backwards. Thinking it was probably Rachel pulling a joke, I turned the doll's head and went over to her room. However, Rachel seemed to be fast asleep and didn't seem like she had gotten out of bed. I shut her door and go back to my room, and the doll had now fallen off the chair. I didn't even dare touch it and just shut the door and slept on the couch. When morning came, I wasn't gonna bother Rachel with questions about the doll, so I ignored it and waited for the parents to arrive. I got paid and left the house and refused to babysit for Rachel again. When they did call me, I simply declined and claimed that I had gotten another job. I haven't experienced anything paranormal like that again, and I have moved past it. This story has shocked me to my core ever since, and I've even developed a fear of dolls. Whenever I see one, I always walk away.
Sorry this is a bit long. I know this isn't a therapist office, but this has been bothering me for a long time and I wanted to get it off my chest. This happened June 2018 in Portland, Oregon. I understand that I acted like an idiot in this situation. Since then, I have become more observant, cautious, and honestly, much more paranoid. I went dancing with friends and was really drunk by midnight. Unfortunately, this was back when I had little money and I realized you could save money by eating very little before going out, and it would take far fewer drinks to get drunk. So I was so drunk, I barely remember my friend ordering me an Uber ride home. My phone was dead, of course. I vaguely recall them helping me into the car and telling me to get home safe. I don't remember greeting the driver or the first minute or so. Soon after getting in, he asked me how my night was and if I smoked. Honestly, I was just thinking about bed at this point, so I sort of just slurred out that I did sometimes. He offered me a joint, and this is the first moment I sort of get nervous and begin paying attention. I'd tell him something like, I'm really tired and just want to go home. I think he said something about it being an indica-based joint and it made great for sleep. Once again, I say something not exactly like no, but not a yes, which he takes as a yes. I'll take the joint now. Once again, I'm still drunk enough I can barely see straight or speak clearly. So when he says, okay, well, I have to cancel the ride real quick because I can't give it to you while I'm on the clock, or something to that effect. It takes me a second to realize how dangerous that was, and by the time I start to say something, he has canceled the ride and pulls over. We were in an area just east of the Hawthorne Bridge, I think, and it was totally secluded. Some empty parking lots, a close-by auto body shop with no one in sight. It started to hit me. I'm now in a car, not with an Uber driver, but with some stranger. I can't call anyone, and he's trying to give me weed that could have anything in it. For the next minute or so, we're pretty quiet. Or I just can't remember any small talk he tried to make because I was beginning to panic. And every time he handed me the joint, I would take fake hits, just breathing into my mouth and not into my lungs. I felt tired, clumsy, and weak. That kind of drunk where you're almost at the point of nausea. And I knew I couldn't do much of anything to defend myself at that point. I remember vividly being fixated for a moment on the fact that I didn't even have a pair of keys to defend myself with, as my building uses fobs for just about everything, and I didn't take my mail key with me. As I'm freaking out, I look up to see this guy sort of noticing, and I make eye contact with him in the mirror. He was staring at me, but I couldn't read his expression. Finally, he says something along the lines of, well, let's get out of here. I tell him I'll just call another Uber home, thinking at this point it might be safer to walk, and he says, no, I still have your address, I'll take you home. For a moment I was relieved. I guess I wanted to believe him badly that I was going to get home safe. I tried to calm myself down, thinking he hadn't actually done anything threatening. Maybe he was just your typical stoner guy, and I was overreacting. At this time, I lived on the PSU campus in downtown Portland, in the southwest area of the city. He was driving me north, on the east side of the river. There are several bridges to our left, and as he keeps moving north, he has several opportunities to take the exit and hop over the river to get me back downtown. He keeps skipping all of them. We keep passing bridge after bridge that could get me home. Up in northeast Portland, there are some large industrial areas that can get very isolated at night. And Portland in general is surrounded by a lot of forests, so I knew he could take me to a secluded area really quickly. After he passes like the fourth exit for a bridge, pretty sure it was Broadway Bridge, I've been racking my brain for a way to make him actually take me home and say something to the effect of, hey, my boyfriend is waiting for me at home. Which was true, though I said it in a very meek way. The driver says nothing, but did take the next exit bridge and basically hung a giant U-turn and started taking me home. Even as we were on the west side of town heading south, I was still shaking and my hands were on the door handle, thinking about just hopping out of the car at a red light the closer we got to my apartment. My phone is completely dead, and he honestly still had several chances to hop onto a nearby highway and speed off out of the city. We're getting pretty close to my apartment now, and I'm once again trying to convince myself that I'm being paranoid about a stoner that can't navigate the city. Although a few minutes before I was so scared I was crying. So once we get about 2 blocks from my apartment, I lie and tell him it's easiest to stop here and he can let me out. Again, he doesn't say anything, but does slow the car. I'm flooded with relief and even feel myself smile, but when I go to open the door, it's locked. I try to lift the lock mechanism manually, but it won't budge. I look up at him instinctively to see what's up, and he's got his head turned almost fully around towards me, his shoulders still facing the road, smiling at me. The worst fucking smile I've ever seen. I just started to cry and asking him to open the door. I was so freaked out and still very drunk, and thank God he did. I will never forget the sensation of vulnerability, not just being drunk in a car with no way to contact anyone, but even as I got out of the car, I kept feeling like he would somehow grab the back of my shirt and pull me back in, as silly as that sounds. When I got home, I found out that my boyfriend had actually gone out with his friends at the last minute and wasn't even home. He wouldn't have even known until much later if I had gotten back safe. The next day, I convinced myself that I was freaking out over nothing, which I realized still could be the case. But in my gut, I had truly felt in danger the night before. Technically, this guy could have been totally harmless, but I still think I should have texted my friend and reported him. The big thing that made me think of this was recently hearing about how Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, would go for practice runs, picking up hitchhikers and seeing if he could get the passengers, potential victims, to trust him, and how far out of his comfort zone he could push them without them saying anything. Obviously this guy wasn't Ed, but I hate wondering if that night was a practice run of some sort for my Uber driver.
I used to go to Starbucks all the time. I would say at least 2 or 3 times a week I would stop at Starbucks for coffee on my way to work. I would order online every time as I left my house and then pick it up on my way. I got it so often that some of the employees started to recognize me, and I would be friendly with a few of them. Sadly though, the lines at the location I usually went to were always super long, and one day I realized another Starbucks that was also on my way to work. I made the choice to switch locations to see if it would be faster, and it was in fact quite a bit faster every single day, and it saved me some time. After I would say about a couple of weeks of going to the new location, one day I forgot to place my order online. It wasn't a big deal, but I would just have to order at the drive-thru at the Starbucks. When I got there, the voice on the other end of the speaker of the drive-thru said hi to me and called me by my name. This surprised me because I had only been to that location 3 or 4 times at that point, and it wasn't a daily basis or anything. I also didn't recognize the voice as it was a man's voice, and all the people I knew from the previous location were females. I pulled up to the next window after I ordered, and a man with a headset came to the window. I paid and he handed me my coffee and smiled. He once again said my name and told me to have a nice day, then he winked at me. The man was rather tall and had sort of long dark hair with a slight beard. I have to say I had never seen him before, but beyond that I really didn't think anything of it. It wasn't until every single time that I would go to Starbucks after that, he would be working and would always be the one to hand me my order. Each time he would wink at me or have an almost creepy grin on his face. None of this really bothered me though, but it did feel a little bit strange. Then I stopped seeing the man. There were different people every time when I got my coffee in the morning, and I didn't really notice the fact that I wasn't seeing this strange guy anymore. One of the times I went inside to pick up my coffee and was walking back to my car when suddenly I saw the man again. He was in the parking lot and he approached me as I was getting into my car. I didn't really recognize him at first. It took me a few seconds. He said hi to me and smiled and asked me how I was doing. I said fine in a confused tone and asked what he wanted. He then asked me how the movie I watched last night was. Then he winked at me like the past times and walked away. I stood there next to my car in shock. I had in fact been watching a movie the previous night, but I had no idea how he knew about it. I was really creeped out, and for me, this was the last straw with the man from being slightly weird to completely creepy. I had no idea who this guy was other than the fact that he worked at the Starbucks and was creepy. I decided to go back inside the Starbucks and ask another employee who he was. I first looked around the parking lot, but the man was gone. I then walked inside the Starbucks, which was relatively busy, but nothing too crazy. I went to the counter and asked who the man was with longer brown hair, a slight beard, and pretty tall. I was told in response that it sounded a lot like a guy named Jonathan, who had worked there but had been fired for inappropriate behavior around the workplace. They said he had worked at another location close by, but had moved to that location shortly before getting fired. I briefly told my story. I was told by several people that they thought he seemed creepy and had apparently followed one of his coworkers home one night. It gave me the chills as I realized this Jonathan guy most likely was outside of my house the previous night and saw me watching a movie. So many thoughts started to race through my head, such as how did he know where I lived, and had he followed me home or been to my house before? I had to go to work at that point, so I left, but throughout the day I texted with several of my friends about what had happened. Later that day I got home from work and asked my friend Lisa to come over and keep me company. I got home and shortly after heard the sound of Lisa pulling up. I was so relieved because I really didn't want to be alone in my house that night after what had happened. But then I received a text from Lisa saying that she would be there in about 15 minutes. I went over to look out the window and noticed a different car driving slowly down the street outside my window. I lived in a quiet neighborhood and there wasn't a whole lot of cars that went down the street, so I sort of noticed when they did. It was a black car and the windows were tinted. It parked across the street, but slightly past my house. Of course, I was paranoid and worried that it was the Jonathan guy. I watched the car from my window, hoping to see anybody get out of the car that wasn't Jonathan from Starbucks. But nobody was getting out. Then my phone started to vibrate and ring in my left hand as I held the living room curtain open with my right. It just about gave me a heart attack, and I closed the curtain and looked at who was calling me. It was a number that I didn't recognize. I decided to answer it. The voice on the other end was the familiar voice of Jonathan. I heard him ask me why I was watching him and told me to come outside. I freaked out at this and screamed as loud as I could that I was calling the police. He then hung up on me, and I opened the curtain slightly to see his car pulling away. I then called the police, and they said they would be on their way. They arrived a short time later along with Lisa. I gave them as much information as I could on Jonathan, and I stayed at Lisa's house the next few nights. Finally, I was told that Jonathan had been found, and I would no longer have to worry about him anymore. He had worked at the first Starbucks I had been to almost every day, and apparently asked to transfer when he realized I had gone to another one. I just wonder how long he knew where I lived, or how many times he had been to my house without me noticing.
When I was about 11, my family and I moved into a new home in Los Angeles. It wasn't anything too big, just a one-storied home appropriate for a family of 3. I attended a private school in the city and was a naturally socially awkward child. This will be important in the story later. I'd also like to mention that I have autism, meaning it was hard for me to make friends and interact with others. Both my parents were fully aware of this and had made me go through therapy and other medication to help me with it. While it did improve a little bit, I still had some challenges I had to deal with. Anyway, we had moved to Cali as my dad had other work there with a higher salary. This meant that he'd most of the time be working and not at the house. I mean, my mom would sometimes watch over me, but she worked too and would sometimes have to get a babysitter. My current babysitter, who I adored, had recently moved over 2,000 miles away for a better job. It was sad, but that was the reality, and we had to find another sitter. Eventually, my mom had found me a new sitter who wasn't like the old one, but was still manageable. Her name was Luna, and she claimed to be just 19 years old. She was nice, but had a few issues that I began to take notice from for the first few visits. While it wasn't anything too concerning, they were very much noticeable. At first, it was relatively minor things like twitching and loss of focus. However, these things began to turn into bigger problems, all the way from talking to herself to sometimes asking me weird questions. I could only assume that she had some sort of disorder and remembered feeling sympathy toward her. The first night I met Luna was when both of my parents had their anniversary and another time where they both had work. I'd say these tics didn't arise until the third visit of babysitting where I started to take notice. But the more she babysat me, the worse the tics would get. It wasn't until one night though, where she did something that really pushed the limit. It was Valentine's Day of 2014 and my parents had gone out in the city for a nice dinner. This meant that I would be home with Luna until they got back. For the first hour, she helped me with my homework and then we played a game. Things went well for the most part, and even though I barely interacted with her, I wasn't rude. I remember giving her a hard time when it was my bedtime that night. It was stupid of me, but keep in mind, I was an 11-year-old boy that didn't want to sleep. Eventually, however, I ended up complying and went to sleep without any problems. Looking back, however, I'd say I slept for a good few hours or so before I awoke to my bedroom door being opened. Thinking it was just a draft, I thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. However, that was when I hear my door open a little more and there was someone standing in the corner of my room. The figure then slowly walks over toward me, coming to a complete stop. At first, I couldn't see who it was, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, my light from my nightlight revealed Luna standing at the edge of my bed. I turn on my light and Luna immediately apologizes, telling me she's sorry and that she tends to sleepwalk. In her hand was one of my dad's power drills with the battery taken out. She went on with more excuses while trying to tell two separate stories about why she had it. Of course, being only 11, I had my suspicions, but it wasn't enough to see her as a threat. Later that night, my parents had come home and paid her. It wasn't until the next morning where I woke up and told my parents about Luna and what she did. They, of course, flip out and attempted to call Luna multiple times. My mom had also found empty bottles of her prescription medication gone. However, Luna denies any wrongdoing and police couldn't actually do anything since she technically didn't commit a crime. It all makes no sense, and it doesn't till this day. Luna never babysat for me again after that, and I hope I never see or hear from her again. I still will never know for sure what she was planning on doing with that power drill, and it still haunts me from time to time. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at my local McDonald's as a second source of income to pay for my college tuition. I attended med school in the city, which wasn't cheap at all. Sometimes we'd have to get there at really early hours of the day. I have a class every Monday and Wednesday night, meaning I'd have to get to bed early to wake up for work the next day. My manager, being the jerk that he was, gave me a week of opening shifts knowing my situation about my classes. One morning, I had arrived to work with my coworker to take out the food and help refill sauces to open the restaurant. Anyway, we're getting everything ready while I'm wiping down tables so we can open at 4, which is the time McDonald's usually opens here in Canada. So we're doing our tasks when all of a sudden we see a man looking inside from the glass doors. He's banging on the doors in a sort of rapid motion as if he wanted to get in. I give him a sort of denying motion, telling him that we were closed. However, he insisted to come in as he claimed he was hungry and just wanted a quick bite. I apologized and told him that we were closed and to come back in an hour where I could serve him. This seemed to faze him as he then walked away, disappearing into the night. I continued to help my coworker mop the floors before I see the man come towards the doors with what appeared to be a golf club. As expected, he smashes the glass doors and proceeded to step inside. I told my coworker that we had to leave through the back door and to call the police. She does just that, and we leave the McDonald's and into my car. Thankfully, police were able to arrive in a timely manner to catch this man going through our register. As police were restraining him, my coworker and I heard a commotion going on and a few tasers going off. After that, the police had given us the all clear to return to work. As we walk inside, we then see the police force the man into the back seat of the cruiser. His face will forever be burned into the back of my head as he stared down at us. It was a very menacing, revengeful type of look, as if the first thing he'd do once he got out of jail would be to come back for us. The inside of the McDonald's was left a wreck. Money scattered on the floor, cups misplaced, and even food items spilled on the floor. We, of course, had to clean it all up and finish getting everything ready to open while the police stood by to ensure our safety. We opened, and the day went smoothly as planned with no other disruptions. The following week, an employee at another McDonald's got injured during a robbery not too far away from our location. I quit after I learned that, as I didn't want to risk putting myself into danger. My area was known to be one of the safest areas in Vancouver, so for something like this to happen was rare. I ended up doing freelance work later on and eventually graduated to become a full-time nurse. Anyway, that's my story, and it's also the reason why I will never work at fast food again.
My name is Nate, and I was around 15 years old when this happened. My family and I had lived in a small town right outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I attended school at a private institution and was definitely no popular kid. I had a group of friends, but there were only two in the group who I really considered as real friends. They've always had my back, and we would even go to each other's houses on Fridays. One night, my parents were out of state for a work event, and being the rebellious kid I was, I had both my friends over for a movie night. It was me, my good friend Ryan, and my other friend Mike, along with my dog Bruce, who we all knew and adored. Bruce was a big German shepherd who had the personality of a teddy bear and was very friendly. When they arrived, our first move was to help ourselves to my dad's stock of booze he kept in his closet. Yeah, we were crazy kids, and if we were to get caught, it would have been worth it. We spent the next few hours playing video games and watching the hit new season of Stranger Things. As we're about halfway into one of the episodes, the three of us hear an unexpected knock at the door. The three of us looked confused, as we weren't expecting any more visitors. I got up from the couch to go to the door, expecting it to be my parents, possibly returning home early. Standing there on the porch was a Domino's delivery pizza man carrying a single large pie. He gives us a smile and says, "Hey, large pepperoni, paid for online." We all look at each other as we hadn't ordered any pizza. However, the three of us are suckers for pizza and we gladly take it off his hands. Being a bunch of teens, we weren't going to give up on a free pizza. However, Ryan, being the good Samaritan he was, had gotten us to agree that we shouldn't just eat someone else's food. In the end, we decided it was the right thing to do, and so we left the pizza on the kitchen table and called the nearest Domino's. We told them that there had been a mistake and that we received an unordered pizza. They ask for my address, and when I tell them, they say that they hadn't gotten any orders from that part of town all day. On top of that, they had also pointed out that my location barely met their delivery radius. We confirmed to them several times that it was indeed a Domino's pizza. They told us they would check around and call us back if they had found anything. And if they found nothing, we could just go ahead and eat it. We give them about 10 minutes to call us back and fix ourselves a few snacks in the meantime. We head back into the kitchen and was shocked by what we found. Bruce had stuffed his face into the pizza box and had eaten nearly half of the pizza. As funny as it was, we knew that we had been in hot water if this really was a mistake. Ryan goes to throw the pizza in the trash, and we finish our show while eating our snacks. About 30 minutes later, I started to notice that Bruce had started to become noticeably distressed. He had been whimpering and crying and would frequently begin losing his balance. After a few minutes of checking to see what was wrong with him, it didn't take long to realize that he was extremely ill. Not wanting to wait any longer, we all carry him and find a nearby emergency vet. We thankfully find one and rush him in there as soon as we could. Because this was later in the night, the vet had taken him home almost immediately to get tested on. According to the vet, he was displaying unusual symptoms and behavior. Upon running a few more tests, they had found something that nearly turned our stomachs. There had been several traces of strychnine found in Bruce's system. It's a very dangerous poison, mainly used for killing rodents. If consumed, this can ultimately kill you in about 30 minutes. It turns out that the cheese on the pizza had been laced with it. My parents had to come home right away when they found out, and we had told the police everything. We even tried describing the guy who had given us the pizza, but nothing came of it. Because he had looked like any ordinary pizza delivery person, there was no way to accurately describe what he looked like. There had been no reports in the area of other people receiving a poisoned pizza. The good news was that Bruce did thankfully survive with proper treatment. However, if we would have waited just 10 minutes later, chances are he wouldn't have made it. If you ever get food deliveries to your house that you never ordered, call the company it was from to confirm. It might just save your life.
When I was around 7 years old, my family and I moved into an old house. It was a really big house with 4 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, 2 living rooms, and even had a dumbwaiter. It was at least 80 years old and was in pretty good condition for a house that old. My parents both worked 12-hour shifts at a hospital and would oftentimes have to get a sitter for me. My current babysitter, who I looked up to dearly, had moved away over 2,000 miles to another state to start her career in law. Needless to say, I wasn't doing well because of it. She had been with us for over 6 years and even considered her as family. Anyway, with her now gone, my parents had to look for a new babysitter. We had lived in a town where there weren't many sitters, meaning there was a better chance for them to have low reviews. Thankfully, we had found one who lived in walking distance that had 4-star reviews, which wasn't bad but still convenient. Her name was Sandra, and she seemed really nice. She was 24, attended college, and was apparently really good with kids. We'd play games together, she'd help me with my homework, watch TV, etc. My parents got along well with her, and as the weeks went by with her as my new babysitter, I started to see her a lot like my previous one. While all of this was great for both my parents and I, something happened during a visit that would change my whole perspective of her. It was a Friday night, and my parents were on a weekend trip to the Bahamas for their anniversary, and I was with Sandra. She had bought me some pizza and sat down with me to watch SpongeBob to keep me company. We watched for about an hour or so before she tells me to get ready for bed. Now, I was never the rebellious type of kid, so I complied and went up to bed to go to sleep. I fall asleep almost instantly and probably slept for a good 2 hours or so when I woke up to a steady banging noise. It was pretty loud, especially from my room, and kind of sounded like someone hitting a hammer against a wooden door. I turn on my light and quietly tiptoe down the stairs to the living room where the noise was coming from. I descend into the living room where the light was on, and what I saw next will forever stay with me. Sandra had been facing the back door while forcefully hitting her head on it. On the floor was a small puddle of blood that was coming from her nose, as well as blood dripping down the door. Being only 7, I tried to process as to what I was seeing, but I was just simply petrified. I let out a loud scream across the house and got on the house phone to dial 911. I spoke with the operator, trying my best to describe what it was that I was seeing. All the while, I'm screaming at Sandra to please stop, but she didn't seem to care or acknowledge me. I'm still on the phone with the police, giving them my address and to please come as soon as possible. The police heard the banging in the background and arrived in minutes with 3 officers restraining Sandra. She tried to resist no matter what, leaving one of the officers with no choice but to tase her. They called for an ambulance, and one of the officers called my parents, letting me know the situation. That night, my aunt came to stay with me at her house until my parents got back. As for Sandra, she had been rushed to the hospital where she regained consciousness and suffered from severe injuries. According to my parents, Sandra doesn't remember any of it or what had happened. All she remembered was her on the couch with her phone when she felt dizzy and got up until everything went black. Till this day, it's still unclear as to what had happened that day or what it was. Either way, it's one of the most horrifying encounters I've ever witnessed.
Many years ago, when I was about 12 years old, I had a sleepover at my best friend Kevin's house. Kevin was my best friend from the time I was about 5 years old until probably college. We are still friends to this day. We had countless sleepovers at either my house or his house, which were only a few miles apart from each other. Typically, it would be on a weekend, like a Friday night to Saturday, and I remember that one Friday, I went over to his house after school. Kevin's house was a split level. His bedroom was on the upstairs, and in the basement was where we hung out a lot. I really liked his basement because they had a bunch of snacks, a big fridge, and of course, a TV and video games. We went down there first and hung out for a while. I remember that Kevin's mom had to go take his sister somewhere, and his dad was at one of his friends' houses. We played video games into the night, and when it was dark out at probably like 8 p.m., all of a sudden we heard a noise coming from the door leading outside from the basement. We both paused the game and looked up at the same time. I think we both asked each other, "Did you hear that?" It was pretty unlikely that Kevin's parents or sister would be trying to enter through the back sliding door in the basement. Neither of us could see to the door from where we were, but it was just around the corner. Kevin slowly got up and peeked around the corner and motioned for me to wait where I was. When he did, he came sort of running back. He said that there was a guy there. I couldn't resist, and I got up and peeked around the corner as well. Kevin was right. There was a man standing at the back door, but it was really dark, and I couldn't tell any details about him. I ran back, and I don't think the man saw us, but to be honest, I really have no clue. We tried to figure out what to do. Neither Kevin or I had a cell phone, but luckily, there was a home phone in the basement. Kevin got it and called his dad and told him what was going on. He said his dad was coming home and should be back in like 10 minutes. In the meantime, we had to figure out what to do. I looked again to see if the guy was still there, and he was. We heard him try opening the door again. Thank goodness it was locked. Kevin and I didn't want to stay downstairs any longer, and we both ran upstairs. We went into Kevin's bedroom and shut the door. From there, we couldn't hear the man trying to open the door anymore, but we figured that we would be able to hear him if he got inside the house. Not too long after, we heard the front door opening, and then heard the voice of Kevin's dad. We went downstairs and showed him where we had seen the man, but the man was now gone. Kevin's dad went outside and looked all around the yard, which was about an acre. He came back a while later, saying whoever was there was now gone and he probably wouldn't come back. After that, Kevin and I played a little more video games until it got late. Then we went up to go to bed. Kevin actually had a bunk bed. I'm not sure why, because he had the whole room to himself, but I slept on the bottom bunk and Kevin slept above. It took me a while to fall asleep. Kevin seemed to fall asleep pretty quick, but I just wasn't quite as tired. I laid in bed relaxing and trying to get tired, but then I heard another noise. It broke the complete silence in Kevin's house. It was the sound of something hitting Kevin's bedroom window. Then I heard it again. I looked to the window but saw nothing. My heart started racing and I was telling myself that it was nothing, but I wanted to be certain, so I got up and went over to the window and looked outside. But when I did, I saw a guy standing down below looking right up at me. I jumped back and ran and woke up Kevin. He was super confused at first, but then got up and looked out the window. The man was still there. Kevin ran to his parents' room and woke them up. I stayed at the window and looked outside. The man was walking closer to the house, and before long, Kevin's parents entered the room and his dad walked over to the window. At that point, the man turned and ran away. The police were called, but when they arrived, the guy was long gone. The man didn't return for the rest of the night, and I went home the next morning. I was glad that I didn't live at Kevin's house, because I would have been really afraid that the guy would return. However, I never heard Kevin mention anything about him again. Back when I was in elementary school, I had a lot of different friends. During those times, I went to several sleepovers, usually with my best friend James or some of my other good friends. At one point during 5th grade though, I remember that I had a friend named Orion. I was pretty good friends with Orion, but not like best friends or anything. I thought he was cool though. He was one of my newer friends because the previous year was his first at my school. I'd been to his house once before for his birthday, and I think his parents were rich or something because their house was super nice. He also had all the latest video games and a giant TV. So one day, he invited me over to have a sleepover at his house, and I was really excited. His mom called mine later in the day, and then the next day, I went to his house after school. When I got to Orion's house, I was surprised to see 2 other kids there. There were 2 guys who seemed to be our age, but I didn't recognize them. They weren't Orion's brothers because I knew he was an only child. He introduced me to them and said they were his friends from his last school. Their names were Joey and Thomas. I had no idea that Orion was having other friends over as well. It made me a little less comfortable because I didn't know these guys, but I figured that it would still be fun. Orion kind of started talking to Joey and Thomas and didn't seem to pay as much attention to me. He talked about things that I didn't really know about, and I felt like the odd man out. We played video games, but had to take turns because there were 4 of us and only 3 controllers. After hours of that, we finally decided to go to bed. We were all going to sleep in Orion's basement. They had a big room with several couches and also had a couple of air mattresses. 2 of us would take the 2 couches, and the other 2 would take the 2 air mattresses. I took the couch which was on the end of the room, closest to the stairs. I really didn't know what time it was when we all went to sleep, but it had to be pretty late. At one time during the night, I woke up. When I did, I saw that Thomas was crouched down at the end of the couch that I was sleeping on. He appeared to be going through my backpack. I mostly had school stuff inside of it, but had a bunch of other stuff as well. I was confused as to why he was doing this. Before I had a chance to sit up or ask him what he was doing, he stood up with my backpack in hand and walked out of the room. I sat up looking around wondering what Thomas, a kid I barely knew, was doing with my backpack. Everybody else was sleeping. About a minute later, I heard his footsteps coming back and I pretended to be asleep. When he was back in the room, I opened my eyes to see. I saw Thomas, but he no longer had my backpack, and my backpack was not back at the end of the couch either. Then, Thomas got back to his air mattress and went back to sleep. I fell asleep again shortly after, and the next morning when I woke up and my backpack still wasn't there, I confronted Thomas. In front of everybody after we were all up, I asked Thomas why he took my backpack during the night. I said that I had seen him. He started laughing, but I could tell in his face that he was nervous. He said that he never touched my backpack, and he didn't know what I was talking about. I described to him in detail what I saw, but he still denied it, and he started to get mad at me as well. I asked him where my backpack was, and then showed everyone how mine wasn't there. They suggested that I didn't even bring a backpack. Now this really made me bad, because it seemed like Joey and Orion were both taking Thomas's side. I told him that I was going home and I needed my backpack. Then I called my mom. She came to pick me up and even went inside Orion's house and we both looked for it. But eventually, Orion's parents basically kicked us out and said that if it turned up, they would call us. I went home furious. Obviously, I had taken my backpack to Orion's house because I had gone there straight from school, and I always brought my backpack to school. Inside of my backpack, it was mainly school stuff like notebooks, folders, and pencils, but I also had some things of value, such as my Nintendo DS and several games for it, and other little knickknacks and some food. I told my mom all about what had happened, and she told me she would call Orion's parents again the next day if they didn't find it. This was a Saturday, and the next day, on Sunday, when I woke up, I went outside and on the front step of my house was my backpack. However, it was open and emptied out, except for the school supplies. Literally everything was gone from it other than my notebooks, folders, and pencils. I was livid. The next day at school, I told Orion all about it, and surprisingly, he still took the side of his friend Thomas. He said that he had no clue how my backpack would end up at my front step, and then he got mad at me for accusing Thomas of stealing from me, and said that Thomas was his best friend. That basically ended our friendship, and I never hung out with him again, and barely even spoke to him for the next 2 years until he changed schools again. I really don't know who left my backpack at my front step. There's no way that Thomas would know where I lived. Overall, this was one of the creepiest things to happen to me.
I've been on Reddit for 2 years now, and I just found this subreddit. After reading a few of the top posts, I realized what had happened this summer to me is a perfect fit here. I haven't written anything in a long time, so sorry if this isn't the most articulate post. It's messed up for a while, and I'm still not completely okay, but it's easier to cope. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in the Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made some pulled pork and pasta for me to heat up whenever I wanted. I also had some money if I wanted to order a pizza or something. Things were all good. The first night alone, I stayed up until 3 in the morning playing Xbox. So I woke up really late the next day. When I checked my phone, I saw that it was a little past 1, and I had made plans to play some street hockey with my friends at 3. So I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes on my phone, scrolling through Reddit and Twitter, when I heard my front door open. The bathroom is directly up the stairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be home alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, ears trained in trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I figured it was just the wind, or maybe my parents were home early. So I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. The stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in. So it's essentially like walking down a tighter version of this, but replacing the rail with a wall. So I can't exactly see into the kitchen when I walk down. My house is really old, and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak. I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down all 12 of the stairs. So when I get to the second to the last stair, right before I could see around the corner into my kitchen, I take a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew it was going to be something stupid. There obviously wasn't going to be anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard any other noise, and there's no reason for them to still be in the kitchen, even if there were burglars in the house or something. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being so stupid, then casually walked down the last 2 steps and turned the corner into my kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of my kitchen is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face. Just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or the smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting him up and a little behind himself. I'm not sure why I remember this so much, but it's the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back now, I can realize how creepy this situation was, but in the moment, I just took a step towards him and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping and pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropping my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. I quickly put a chair up against the doorknob like you see in TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately called 911, nearly in tears, and told the operator what had just happened. As I sat on the floor of my room and practically in the fetal position, staring at the door, praying a cop would be here soon, I noticed the light coming from the gap between my door had just stopped. He was standing outside of my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of my door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying the man would go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while the 911 operator was asking,
"Hello, sir? Sir, are you still there? Hello?"
I didn't want to make a noise. Even if I wanted to move my arms to bring my phone to the mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest footsteps, slowly creaking on the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for a few minutes, as I just sat there curled up still, unable to even speak. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I finally felt safe. I opened up the door and the 2 of them were standing there. I almost cried. Nowadays, my parents don't even leave me home alone. And thank God. I check every lock on the house before going to bed, and I still occasionally get nightmares. My heart starts racing whenever I see someone standing still. Even working with sketch artists and a few lineups, the police never found out whoever was in my house. And that sends shivers down my spine every time I look outside, half expecting to see him standing across the street, smiling under a lamppost. I have no idea what he wanted or who he was, but regardless, let's not ever meet again.
Okay, so this happened about a year ago. I'm in a long distance relationship and I often fly to visit. I didn't have a ride arranged to come pick me up, so I usually use Lyft or Uber to get to and from the airport. This particular ride started off fine. The guy was from Haiti, I believe, he said, so he had a very thick accent that was often hard to understand. The beginning of the ride was him just making small talk like most drivers do. "Where are you flying from? Are you in college? Do you have family here?" And so on. We get on the freeway and there's lots of traffic. I had a layover flight, and of course the outlets were all in use and I couldn't charge my phone. I'm hoping traffic lightens up because I really need to keep in contact with the people I was going to stay with. Of course, my luck, the app crashes and says, "You have arrived," while we were literally in the middle of the freeway, near no houses at all. I kind of get annoyed and the driver says he'll pull over at Walmart nearby to figure out what's going on. Apparently he had a very old phone and it wasn't giving proper directions, so I said he can use mine, but I needed to charge it. He asked me to sit up front so it would be easier, and I thought nothing of it, so I hopped up front. He tells me he will take me the rest of the way for free without using the Lyft app. I put the address in and we're back on our way. As we're pulling out of the Walmart parking lot, he asked me how old I am. I just turned 18, and that's when things got kind of weird. He seemed to lighten up at how young I was, which was a bit odd, but whatever. He then asked me a series of questions like, "Why don't you live here in the state? You should move here. You can go to college here, so why don't you? I'm a doctor, and Lyft is just a side job, so I have money." This man was at least in his mid-40s. I told him I had no money to just randomly move states and start college, seeing as I just became a legal adult. He then told me, "I can take care of you. I can buy you a little apartment and a nice car and take you out and pay for your college. I thought he was joking, so I kind of just awkwardly laughed and said that's okay. He didn't need to do that, but he kept insisting, and I was getting kind of creeped out. I really didn't want to jump to any conclusions. I thought maybe he's just not sure how to have a proper conversation since he's foreign or something. About 20 minutes later, we have about 5 minutes from my destination. My phone keeps doing that annoying charging, not charging, as phones do when the charger wire is loose. I had this phone for a while, so it did this from time to time, and apparently hadn't really been charging it much at all, and it died. Since we were so close to my destination though, I told him I knew the rest of the way, but I tell him to turn right, and he says okay, and purposely turns left, or keeps going straight. Anything but what I told him to do. Now we're lost because he's ignoring everything I'm saying and playing it off as an accident, and I'm not super familiar with this entire area. I only knew a small portion of the streets. He tells me he lives nearby, and I start getting really scared because I think he's going to kidnap me or something. I let out a single tear, and then I tell myself to keep it together, because in the movies, whenever they see someone's fear, they get mad or something, so I'm trying to make it seem like I'm not losing my shit. Finally, he goes back around, and when we're almost there again, he purposely goes the wrong way again. At this point, I got my cell phone to about 5%. He reaches over while at a red light and grabs my phone and rates himself a 5 stars on Lyft and friends me on Facebook. He also puts his number in my phone and tells me to call him if I ever need anything, and we should go out sometime. I give him a little fake smile so he doesn't know I'm about to shit myself from fear. Eventually, I get so fed up, I just jump out at another red light and tell him, "Thanks, but you're really scaring me. Bye." I call my boyfriend on the 5% battery life and tell him where I am because I'm really scared and I need him to pick me up. The Lyft driver is shouting out the window for me to get back in the car, but there was no way in hell I was going back in there to be someone's sugar baby. That was a total stranger at that. I go somewhere where there's a lot of people and wait for my boyfriend. This whole ordeal made the ride last about 2.5 hours, and it should have only taken around 45 minutes, even with the traffic. Later, I called Lyft and told him everything. He supposedly got fired, so that's good. Anyway, random Lyft driver looking for a young sugar baby to kidnap. Let's not meet again.
I was 14 at the time of this, so keep that in mind for context. I sat on my bed, in my house on my own, per usual. My parents were going to be out for the night, and we lived in a fairly peaceful area, so even the strictest parents would have to let their son watch over the house. As I was on my laptop watching videos, I hear a knock from the door. Mind you, this was 2 a.m., and I was already paranoid from my previous experiences. There's no way I was going to answer that door. But my curiosity was definitely piqued. Since my house is 2 floors, there's a window right above the door in which I could pull these blinds up to a slit to see who was actually there. The porch light was on, so light wasn't too much of a problem. I had to look to see who it was. When I looked, there was nobody at all. I was just about to pull the blind down when I saw someone under the light at the end of the cul-de-sac, and I almost jumped backwards. This person was in a conveniently suspicious looking hoodie and tracksuit with no light showing any facial features. His arms were to his sides, and he was staring directly at me. It was weird. He didn't move at all. He just stood there under the light. After what seemed like 10 minutes, he just turned around and walked back into the darkness of the main street. I just sighed and went back to watching videos. Perhaps he was just some weird guy who came from the train station near my house. I didn't know, but any justification was better than the alternative. Eventually, around 3 a.m., I fell asleep. I woke up around 4:40 to the sound of my dog silently growling behind me. I thought it was because he wanted to go out into the garden, so I turned around and froze in terror. The same person from the street was now in my doorway. Again, no light hit him from the front, so I could only make out a little bit of an outline of his face. I just stared into the void, which I thought was his face. only for him to break the silence finally with advice, which seems very silly at first glance, but I have definitely forever took it to heart ever since.
Lock your back door.
And as he did the first time, he turned around and walked towards the stairs. I was still frozen. He then left through the back door. When I finally gained my composure, I sprinted downstairs and got to the back door itself. He was now in the garden. I could only see his outline. He stayed still for a few moments, only to sprint off into the woods moments later. I never found out who he was. Didn't really care to tell my parents what happened. And yet to this day, they still ask why I insist on keeping the back door locked. Honestly, I believe he was a warning. If he had been an unstable psychopath, I definitely wouldn't be here right now. Considering some of the experiences I've had since, I say locking your doors, even in peaceful areas, is great advice. So to the 2 a.m. security checker, thank you, I guess. Even if your intention was bad, I still learned something from this, and from you.
This story happened about a year ago. I worked for a company where I would have to travel occasionally for work projects. During one work project in particular, I carpooled and traveled with a coworker named Jake to an area about 4 hours away. I will start out by saying that even before my trip, my overall impressions of Jake were that he was sort of weird. I wasn't all that excited about the idea of just he and I traveling together for work, but when Jake asked me to carpool with him, I just said, sure. Immediately, I hated myself for saying yes so fast, but I didn't want to insult him by saying no. Plus, he offered to do all the driving. I figured that without having to drive, I could tolerate him, and we left that morning and had a long and busy day of work. By the time we were done on location, we had some things that we needed to wrap up. Ideally, we would do this back at the office, but we were 4 hours away and it was already 7 p.m. We drove back and got within about an hour away, but we were both really tired. Jake said that he thought he was too tired to make it back to the office. However, his apartment was only 20 minutes down the road and said I could sleep over if I wanted. The truth is, I didn't want to, but I didn't really have a choice and figured it wouldn't be too bad, so I agreed. When we got to his apartment, I saw that there was already a sleeping bag next to his couch. He said I could sleep in the sleeping bag on the couch, and overall, his place was decent. I pretty much went right to bed after the long day of work, but I woke up suddenly from my deep sleep. The sleeping bag that I was in was as if it was zipped shut completely. It was over my head and I couldn't see anything. I felt around to try to lift the sleeping bag from where my head was, but I couldn't find the top of it. Then I realized what was going on. The top of the sleeping bag was being held shut. It was really hot in there and I was sweating. I also felt like I was running out of air. I tried sitting up, but it was difficult. I was still being held down, and I realized that somebody must be holding the top of the sleeping bag closed. I started hitting at the area and trying to wiggle myself off the couch. At last, I was able to escape. Whoever had been holding the sleeping bag closed was now gone. When I felt the cool, fresh air from the rest of the room hit me, it was refreshing. But as I did, I looked around the very dark living room, and I saw what appeared to be Jake disappearing into the hallway towards his bedroom, and then I heard the door quietly close and lock. Why had Jake done this to me? Was he joking or was he serious? It definitely wouldn't be a good joke to nearly suffocate someone and then run away in the middle of the night. I was wide awake now, and I looked at the clock. It was 5 a.m., and I had been sleeping for a good 6 hours or so. We would have to leave for work in only a few more hours, so I just went on my phone and stayed up for the rest of the night. I really didn't want to take a risk going back to sleep after what had just happened. When it was about 7 a.m., I got ready to leave and waited for Jake to get up. He got up several minutes later and asked if I was ready to go, then we left. I didn't want to bring up the night before of what had happened, and I was wondering if he would, but he didn't. We drove the next 30 minutes to work in almost silence, and it was pretty awkward. After we got to work, we finished up the project, and thankfully, I didn't have to work with Jake for the rest of the day or the next day. And after that, I never saw him again. Like 2 weeks later, when I hadn't seen him at all, I asked a coworker who told me that Jake had been fired. I wasn't able to find out from anybody why he was fired though, but I was glad that he was gone. I remember that I had been friends with him on Facebook, so I searched for him, but he was now gone from Facebook. I thought maybe he deleted me, but after searching, I still couldn't find him. I'm not sure what happened to him or where he went, but I'm almost certain that he tried to suffocate me that night.
When I was 17, I worked at a pizza chain as a part-time job in Iowa City, Iowa. Being a teen with not much in my life, I had mostly worked the night shifts alongside my other coworker. It would stay busy well into the day and would start to die down come evenings. This was around the time where people were simply too tired to come and get food and preferred to just order it. I won't disclose any of my colleagues' information, so I'll just call my coworker Jared. Jared was a bit older than me, who was mainly placed in charge of making the pizzas while I was the one delivering them. On this night, it had just been me and him. It was already past 10 and we were getting ready to close when the phone rang. I answered it and right away I hear someone on the other end, an older lady requesting a large pepperoni. I was annoyed as we were about to close and I really did not feel like driving. She had given me the address, which thankfully wasn't too far, and because it was a single pie, I'd be in and out. Thankfully, Jared had made a pepperoni pizza and couldn't deliver it due to a cancellation, so he just told me to take that one instead. I hop into my car and drive a few miles down near the interstate. Now, this interstate wasn't very popular and it was also somewhat unsettling. This was mainly due to the fact that it had been surrounded by forest on the opposite sides of it. Driving through these roads at night with nobody around is enough to creep anyone out. After all, I did live in the rural part of my city, which only added to the creepiness. Anyway, I'm driving down the road when I see something up ahead on the side of the grass. As I drive closer, I realize it's a man waving his arms up in the air, attempting to flag me down. Now, I would have just drove by him, but earlier that week, I had heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking." And for whatever reason, that was the night I decided that I was a man of character. Huge mistake. I pull over slowly and roll down my window just a tad before asking him if he needed help. Right away, he starts rambling on about how he was taking his dog for a walk when it ran off into the woods. He then offers me $300 if I could help him find his dog, as it was near and dear to him. Almost immediately, alarms start going off in my head as he's telling me his story. 1. Who walks their dog in the middle of an interstate? 2. If he did have a dog, why is he walking it at this time of night? And 3. The forest area is barricaded by wired fences, so there's no way the dog would have just jumped over it. I might have been naive, but I wasn't born yesterday. I apologized, telling him I'd be unable to, as I had to deliver this pizza and that it couldn't be late. However, he disregarded what I had said and basically tried pressuring me into helping him. I tell him no once again. Just as he was about to say something, I hear, clear as day, a blood-curdling scream from the woods calling for help. From my point of view, it sounded like a woman's cry for help. It was then when I had looked at this person who now had this menacing glare. He looks around for a brief second, leans in toward my car, and tells me to leave in a more upset tone. Not giving it a second thought, I speed down the road, not looking back. The rest of my delivery went smoothly, but I still couldn't shake the feeling off of what had happened. I reported my encounter to the police, and I was later told that they had searched the area, but had found no sign of anyone. The next day, I had gone back to my job and quit right then and there. No more late-night deliveries for me. Till this day, I'm still not sure what I encountered that night. I'm not sure if it was someone that really did lose their dog or something much worse.
When I was younger, I worked for Starbucks for a while. Our store was in the shittiest part of the town, in a retail park. The area consisted of council flats, where the local council places druggies, ex-cons, and people who are on various benefits. So, although we had some nice customers who were there for a shopping spree, and there were quite a few shady people too. And this one guy came in and acted like a regular, asking every girl about how we were doing. He was really nice and chatty, but he made my skin crawl. The other girls loved him. The guy started to come daily. He usually came around 1 p.m. and stayed until closing, around 11 p.m. And sometimes, he was very pushy about staying even after closing. He always insisted on helping bringing in the outside furniture and stuff. Some managers and I were cautious, especially since we couldn't have anyone in the store after it was closed. He then started to pretty much groom these girls, asking if they were single, about their first boyfriends, and their favorite sex positions. Yeah, the youngest girl was 16. Mind you, I grew up with narcissistic parents, so I learned how to read people at a very early age. Also, I've always been interested in psychology, and I studied it for a few years. And this guy irked me from day one, but I was nice to him because I'm very passionate about not starving to death, so I needed this job. One day, he started to tell me that he had a fight with his parents and they threw him out. He looked very sad and told me that he now sleeps in his van, which was a white, unmarked van. However, since he knew that I was closing that day, he said he'd love to take me home because it's not the nicest neighborhood. I almost laughed. This was such a textbook way to abduct young women. He was doing literally everything, just as my lecturer said that a serial killer or rapist would do. I just told him no, with a straight face, to let him know that I wasn't prey. He then moved on to the other girls, and I notified the manager about his creepy behavior in order to protect our young girlies. And one of them was this sweet, innocent, and a bit naive girl. The creepy guy naturally targeted her next, after my shift leader also laughed in his face. He told this young girl his sob story and expected empathy, which he got. She agreed to be taken home by him, and she even offered him a couch to sleep on. Luckily, my manager was a mama hen type, and she firmly told our young barista to be more careful about strangers and that she would be going home with her. Also, creepy guy was banned from the store, and the manager notified the security around the park. But I'm afraid I don't have a happy ending to this story. All I know that the police were later involved somehow, and he disappeared from the area. So, creepy Starbucks guy who's after young innocent girls, let's not meet again.
So I've been a delivery driver for about 3 years ever since the start of the pandemic. It's a lot more stressful than people think, and I've dealt with several different customers, but this one takes the prize. It was a Thursday, and I had been doing Uber Eats orders for people who just preferred to stay home. Most of the time, I do orders until really late in order to keep the cash flowing. Since this was around the time where these delivery apps really started to take off, I took advantage of it and worked both Uber Eats and DoorDash. On this particular day, I had been using Uber Eats. Not before long, I had received one order from a house that wasn't too far away, and the order was pretty big, which basically meant an extra tip. I drive to the given restaurant, obtain the order, and drive the 10-minute drive to the given address. On this day, it happened to be raining, and one thing I've always hated was driving in the rain. But I had to make my money somehow. It's about 4 in the afternoon, and as I'm driving, I turn into the road where the house was. Now, in order to get to this house, you'd have to go down this narrow pathway that cuts straight into a wooded area. To say the least, it was pretty much a well-hidden path unless you accidentally stumbled upon it or knew where you were going. I pull onto this dirt road, driving as slowly as I can, and pull up to a small one-storied house. At the front of this house was a man sitting in his rocking chair, listening to the rain. I get out of my car and he gets up to come help me with the food. At first, he genuinely seemed like a pleasant guy. He looked like your typical redneck, but he was respectful and apologized for the confusion of his location. I had said that it wasn't a problem and to have a nice day. Before I was about to get back in my car, he then asks if I wanted to come inside to try some pastries he had made earlier. I politely decline and tell him I had to get back to doing orders. However, he didn't even seem to acknowledge my response and simply insisted that I go inside with him. Once again, I declined, telling him I was sorry and that I'm sure they were good. No matter how many times I said no, he'd always make attempts for me to agree, even going as far as raising my tip. This time, I was visibly annoyed, but still kept my composure while giving him a firm no. I then take out my phone, pretending I was on a phone call with another customer. This thankfully made him stop asking me, causing him to go inside with his food. When he did, I hop back into my car, start my engine, and sped off. As I'm driving back down this narrow road, I then see him speed walking after my car from my rear view mirror. Now, if the story had ended there, it wouldn't be scary. But this story comes with a very unsettling twist. That night when I had gotten home, my girlfriend and I had sat down on the couch watching the news. At one point, there was a chilling news report about a man in the area attempting to lure kids into his truck. As much as I hate to say it, we lived in an area that wasn't so great, so stuff like this did happen occasionally. But when this news report showed the person responsible, I almost spit out the water I was drinking. On my TV was the same man I had taken the delivery order from, causing me to go absolutely hysterical. He had the same face, same beard, and the same hair. I just knew it was him. Turns out, he was arrested shortly after I had delivered his food. After all, I knew there was something off about that man, and boy did I end up being correct.
This took place at McDonald's while my mom was still pregnant with me. I've only ever heard a brief version of this story, but up until now, my mom had given me more detail as to what actually happened. This happened in the 80s. At the time, my mom was pregnant with me, and I was also financially unstable. This resulted in her falling behind on bills, struggling to pay rent, buying groceries, etc. Sometimes she used to have to eat at fast food joints to save some money, as groceries were expensive at the time. One night, my mom had just visited one of her old college roommates and decided to stop for food on the way home. According to my mom, it was around 10 o'clock at night, so there weren't many places open. Eventually, my mom had settled by going to McDonald's, as it was pretty much the only option left. She pulls up to the McDonald's, and as she enters, she instantly notices a man sitting at one of the tables. He was wearing a black coat with his head down, and nothing at his table except for a soda cup that appeared to be empty. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, my mom gets her food and sits down at a table to eat. The very second she sits down, the older man on the other side of the restaurant begins to stare intently at her. She had acknowledged this, but decided to ignore it and just eat her food. Now, there's really no way to say this without sounding weird, but my mother was very pretty in the 80s. She'd get a lot of attention from time to time, and while it was strange, she didn't mind it. However, this guy seemed to continue staring at her, even while she kept to herself. As she's eating, the man proceeded to get up and walk over to her to ask her something. He basically had asked her if she had any money on her so that he could buy a drink. Now, my mom was very generous, and even with her financial problems, she loved the idea of putting good in the world. Also, I'm sure she would do just about anything to get him to go away, so she didn't really have a choice. So she looks through her purse and hands him a $5 bill, where he then goes to get his drink. After that, then he gets his things and leaves the McDonald's, where my mom let out a sigh of relief. Long story short, she waits about 20 minutes and leaves as well back to her car. Now this is where things take an unexpected twist. As she's in the car, she starts the engine when 2 police officers come up and tap on her window. She rolls down the window and they instantly ask her if she had seen a man in a black jacket. At first, she didn't know what they were talking about until she remembered about the man from earlier. Their description of the man matched the same exact guy that I saw to a T. Upon telling her that she did see the man inside the restaurant, they tell her that he was actually a convict, who was apparently wanted for murdering his brother and passing it off as a suicide. My mother was horrified as they told her this. The cops took down her info and description and left. My mom still tells me about this story of how she came in contact with the killer, but wasn't sure if he was ever found. Just makes you wonder how many people like him are out there who have never been caught. I guess you really never know who you're talking to.
When I was in my late teens, I worked at a little coffee shop in my city. And this was around the time that smartphones hit the scene. I had just gotten my first phone and laptop. Anyway, we had this one regular customer who was very eccentric. He made me really uncomfortable, if I'm being honest. He had strange vibes. It was in the middle of a scorching summer, and he always wore many layers and a large parka with faux fur trim and sunglasses. I never once saw his eyes. He would get out of his car and run for the door in his big coat, shielding himself from the sun. He always ordered almost every item on the menu, but always said it wasn't for him, and that he didn't like the food there personally. One day, he came in and ordered the whole menu as per usual. I was checking him out at the cash register, and he leaned in and softly said to me, "You seem like a nice young woman. I need to warn you about something. I'm not supposed to tell anyone, but it honestly bothers my conscience keeping this information to myself." "What is it?" I asked. "Do you have a computer or smartphone?" he asked me. "Yes, I just got one," I answered. "Get rid of it, immediately," he said sternly. Why's that?" I asked. "I have a friend who has certain government ties. Nothing is private. The government will be monitoring everything, and it's all permanent. He told me they're planning to put up concentration-type camps in some major US cities. They'll use the info on your cell phones to decide who will go and where they will go. I've gotten rid of everything that can be traced, and I'm planning on running away soon. Please be safe," he urged. He left, and I kinda just shrugged him off as a crazy person, but it still weighed heavy on my mind a while. I went on to leave that job, and got a job as a hostess at a restaurant. About a year passed, and I'd pretty much forgot about the whole encounter, until one day, we crossed paths again. I was at the front host stand, where I greet and seat guests arriving at the restaurant, when a limousine pulls up, and a man gets out, accompanied by 2 large bodyguards at his side. It was the guy from the coffee shop. This time, he was wearing a sleek tuxedo and the same sunglasses. He entered the building and says, "You remember me?" I said I did. He said, "Do you remember what I said?" Again, I told him yes. He proceeds to pass the host stand and examines every inch of the restaurant as if he was looking for something. He then signals his bodyguards to follow him to the door. And before exiting the building, he says, looking back at me, "Don't forget." He got back in the limousine, and I never saw him again after that. It was the strangest thing ever, because it's like he knew he'd find me there. How? How did he find me at my new job? Perhaps he asked someone at my old job, but still, why go out of your way to make some flashy appearance like this? I just randomly thought about this and was wondering whatever became of that man and who the hell he was.
This happened well over 10 years ago, so I'll try my best to describe the events accurately. One of my childhood homes had a balcony that was attached to both my mother's bedroom and mine via a big double glass door on each of our rooms. Next to the balcony are 2 trees. One I often used to climb up and down from the balcony itself. This balcony faced out to the street. One night when I was about 13, my brother and mother weren't home, so I was in bed reading with a very dim reading light. I heard what sounded like something moving in one of our trees outside. But this doesn't worry me because possums and bats are common in our area. Now I had thin curtains on the glass doors that separated my room and the balcony. As mentioned previously, the doors faced out towards the street, where the street lamp light was always visible through those curtains. Shortly after hearing the tree rustling noises, I see a shadow slowly move past the doors, at which point I immediately turn off my reading light and freeze like a deer in headlights. Shadow is tall, so it wasn't one of the neighbor kids that I'm friends with, and it definitely wasn't all of my 5-foot mother. The person moved slowly, creeping as though they were trying to not be noticed. They wouldn't likely be able to see into my room, but I could see them thanks to the streetlights behind them, creating a dark silhouette. They moved past my doors, out of sight. I sat there unable to move or even think about what to do other than be absolutely still. That is until I heard another sound. The sound of someone trying to open the glass door on my mom's side. I didn't know if she had locked them, but I wasn't taking any chances. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could to my bedroom door and locked it. I listened for what the person was doing now. They were still jiggling the glass door handle, but it sounded like the doors weren't opening. I felt relief. This person couldn't get in, surely, and all I had to do was wait for them to realize that, and then they would leave, right? Well, I heard light footsteps move back along the balcony to my set of doors, until I saw that shadow stop directly in front of them. Again, I froze. He couldn't see me. He couldn't know that I could see him. I saw a shadow of a hand reach up to my door handle, and my heart stopped. Had I actually locked those doors myself today? I was out there earlier. What if I forgot? The seconds leading up to him grabbing the handle felt like an eternity. But thankfully, when this person tried to open the door, it did not open. It was locked. I sighed, such a sigh of relief that I was worried he had heard it. After this, he began pacing the length of the balcony. I didn't have a mobile phone as my mom thought it was too young for it and couldn't have one yet, and the landline was at the other end of the house. But I was far too scared to take my eyes off this person or even to call for help. I was silently crying, tears falling down my cheeks as I internally prayed that they would just leave. And I heard him stop moving, and he said,
"I could just break the glass, you know."
Before I could even process this, I saw car headlights turn the corner of my street and then stop at our property gate. My mom was home. The person on the balcony moved out of sight, and I heard a loud thump as they jumped off of it. When my mom came inside, I was hysterical and was barely coherent in telling her what had happened. Eventually, I got the message across, and she called the police. They never found or caught anyone, but a neighbor reported a truck in the street that matched the description of a truck that had been reported recently for attempted child abductions near my school, only a block away. Since I walked that short distance daily, the police suspected that he had followed me or seen where I live and then waited for me to be home alone. So to that creepy dude who scared the hell out of a 13-year-old girl, yeah, let's not meet again.
My name is Emily. Many years ago, when I was a little kid, I had a best friend named Jenna. We met during kindergarten, I remember, and we liked a lot of the same things. We went to school together and hung out all the time for like 2 years. However, after second grade, Jenna and her family moved away, and I didn't get to see her anymore. Obviously, we were little kids, and this was a long time ago, so we weren't able to stay in touch. I ended up making a bunch of new friends over the years, and I sort of forgot about Jenna. I would occasionally remember her in the fun times that we had, and I would wonder how she was doing. Unfortunately, I never would know, and the older and busier I got, the less I would remember her. Well, about a year ago, out of nowhere, I received a friend request on Facebook from Jenna. I'll leave out her last name. At first, I didn't know who she was, but I soon remembered. I couldn't believe that she had found me. I didn't really recognize her in her picture because we were both adults now, and I hadn't seen her since we were like 7. I sent her a message, and soon after, we were messaging each other daily. Basically, we were just catching up and telling about ourselves now. It was kind of weird because we hadn't been friends in such a long time that it felt like I was meeting her for the first time, but also we had been such good friends in the past. She said that she lived in St. Louis now. I lived in Atlanta, and I told her that, and she replied that she traveled there for work all the time. She said that she would be here in 2 weeks. I thought this was too good to be true and offered her to stay at my house. At first, she declined and she said that she would get a hotel, but I insisted. I thought that it would be a great idea. I lived by myself in a smaller house and was interested in spending time with my old best friend. 2 weeks later, she came into town and I welcomed her into my home. We got along great. We would both leave for work at the same time, and when we got off, I would show her cool places around the city and things like that. However, one night, I woke up to a noise inside my house. I was in my bedroom, and Jenna was staying in the one spare bedroom that I had. I quickly realized that she must be up for some reason. It was 3 a.m., and I rolled back over to go back to sleep. But the noises just seemed strange. The noises weren't of somebody just walking, but more the sounds of somebody moving something around. It sounded like it was coming from the living room. I got up quietly and made my way to the doorway and looked out. From there, I could see the hallway and part of the living room. In the hallway, there was 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a closet. I looked out and saw the bathroom door was open and the light was off. The guest bedroom door was closed and that light was off as well. I started to wonder if Jenna was still sleeping and maybe somebody had broken in or something. I kept looking out and into the living room. I could now tell that that was where the noises were coming from. The noises continued on and off for another minute or so. Then someone came into my view. It didn't take me long to see that it was Jenna. I didn't know what she was doing though. For some reason, I didn't want to call out to her either. It looked as though she was looking for something. I decided to just go back to bed. The next morning, I asked Jenna if she had slept good. She said yes, and then I told her I thought I heard a noise in the house. I was basically trying to find out what she was doing without directly asking her. She said that was strange because she had slept right through the night. I told her it must have been nothing, but I was a little suspicious now. She was only staying with me for 2 more days at that point. The next night, I slept good and didn't wake up at all. But the one after that, which was Jenna's last night of staying there, was different. I woke up in the middle of the night once again. When I did, I heard some noises inside my bedroom this time. They were quiet, but loud enough to wake me up apparently. I looked over and saw Jenna crouched down, going through my desk drawers. I was going to say something, but I couldn't. For some reason, I decided to pretend that I was sleeping again. I could hear her trying to be quiet and going through my things. As I was laying there, I was able to get up the courage and I sat up and spoke. I said, "Jenna, what are you doing?" Jenna stopped and turned around. She looked shocked to see me. She then got up and walked quickly out of the room. She shut my door behind her. I then heard her go into my spare bedroom where she had been staying. Then, less than a minute later, she exited that room and walked out of the house. Then she drove off. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. I had no idea what to do, so I went back to bed. The next morning, when I got up, I looked to see that she had blocked my number and blocked me on Facebook. I also later found that she had stolen several items from my house. Looking back at this, I should have never let her stay with me. For someone I hadn't seen in so long, it wasn't a smart idea. I also wonder how she found me again and why she did that to me. Back when I was a sophomore in high school, my family moved to a new city. We lived in the same state, but about 2 hours away from where we used to live, due to my mother changing jobs. I liked the move because we were in an area with more things to do now. Before, we had lived more out in the country. However, what I didn't like was that I didn't know anybody in the area, and I didn't really have any friends yet. I would have to change schools and go to a different high school than I did my freshman year. My old school only had about 50 kids in each grade, and my new school had about 200. When I started out, most people there seemed nice, but I didn't really make any good friends. But about the second week of school, there was a kid who I'm just going to call Joe for this story. Joe was also new to this school. We had a gym class together, and we became friends because we were partners in some gym game that we played. We also had our 5th hour class together, and he quickly became my best friend. Most days, we would talk at any opportunity and would work on homework together during class if the teacher gave us time, things like that. We also would eat at the same lunch table. A few weeks went by, and I started making some new friends, but I still considered Joe to be my best friend. Joe had sort of long brown hair, glasses, and was average height. He was pretty nice for the most part, but he occasionally would say or do some weird things. He and I did not have much in common at all, other than being new students in this school and having 2 classes together. Most of our interests were different. I would say that we mostly just talked about school and just basic stuff. One time Joe said that we should hang out after school, and I told him sure. I gave him my address, and he was going to come over after school on the next Friday. This was probably about a month into the school year now. When Friday arrived, I asked Joe if he was still coming over after school that day. He told me no. He said that he couldn't anymore because he had forgotten about something that he had going on. He said maybe next week though. I wasn't that disappointed, and I would probably just do what I usually did on Friday nights anyways, which was play video games. After school that day, I went home and did just that. I took some breaks to eat and things like that, but luckily for me, I remembered that I didn't have much homework to do at all that weekend. I stayed up sort of late, which I usually did on weekends. I went to bed at probably 1 o'clock in the morning after I got really sleepy. Our house was a 1-story home, and my bedroom was on the front side of the house. My brother's bedroom was next to mine, and my parents' was across the hallway next to the bathroom. After I fell asleep, I woke up to the sound of some noise in my room. I was really disoriented at first, because I must have been sleeping pretty deeply. After hearing another noise, I sat up in my bed to see what was going on. The room remained mostly dark, like when I had fallen asleep, except for my TV screen in the corner of the room. But there was another light coming from my window. I looked to it and realized that my window was open. I normally had drapes covering the window when I slept, but they were partly moved to the side, and I could see my window was slid up. I then looked to the floor beneath the window, and a figure was there. When I saw it, I jumped back in my bed. That's when I saw the figure stand up, and it was Joe. I said nothing, probably because I was so shocked. He looked at me and started snickering a little bit, like a quiet laugh. Finally, I asked him what he was doing here. He didn't answer me at first, and just sort of stood there. Then he said, "Nothing." I really didn't know what to say. I guess I was thinking of what I should ask him out of the thousands of questions going around in my head, but my mind was still a little bit groggy. Before I got the chance, though, he moved back over to the window. Then he jumped back outside and shut the window on his way out. I was then wide awake and went to the window and looked outside of it. I just barely saw Joe now walking away down the street. He must have gotten in easily through the window because I typically slept with my window open just a crack, but why would he even come to my house? I looked at the clock, and it was almost 4 o'clock in the morning. It took me a little while, but eventually I was able to fall back asleep. When Monday came the following week, I planned to ask Joe what that was all about, but Joe wasn't at school that day. In fact, I didn't see Joe for the rest of the semester. I did see him during the next semester in the hallway a couple of times, but I didn't get the opportunity to talk to him. After that school year, he must have changed schools again because I never saw him again after that. In recent years, I've tried to look Joe up on social media, but I've never been able to find him. He has a fairly common name, and I don't know exactly what he would look like now or where he is. I think he was probably going to try and steal from me that night, but I caught him in the act.